Portland Bill LIGHTHOUSES' throaty old Diaphone foghorn will never again echo around the island cliffs. It is fondly remembered by everyone who heard it during more than half a century. Sadly, its deep, awe-inspiring blast has been silenced, as its apparatus has been dismantled in an ambitious modernisation scheme. For more than 300 years, Portland's famous lighthouses have dramatically highlighted this treacherous coast. This, briefly, is their story. The rocky promontory of Portland Bill has long been regarded as one of the greatest navigational hazards in the Channel. Currents clash as they pass over a vast undersea rocky shelf, creating a treacherous race of tempestuous waves. The Romans probably lit beacon fires on Branscombe Hill above Bill Point to warn sailors, but the lack of a local fuel prevented any regular light being established. Consequently, from the earliest times, the island's coast has been the graveyard of countless ships. The earliest known proposals for a lighthouse at Portland Bill were made by London speculators, firstly Sir John Corriton in 1665, and then by Sir John Clayton in 1669. Any private individual could apply to the Crown to build a lighthouse. The desire to save vessels, cargoes and lives were not the sole motive, for handsome profits could be made from the light dues levied on passing vessels, collected at the next port of call. The Lighthouse Authority, the ancient corporation of Trinity House, had vested interests and rejected both of those early proposals. Then, in 1702, Weymouth privateers Charles Langrish and Captain William Holman saw the opportunity to raise funds for themselves, while protecting ships from the dangers of the coast. They sent a petition, which Trinity House again rejected, contending that a light at Portland Bill was not needed, and saying the petitioners could not afford to maintain it. Undeterred, Langrish and Holman kept up the pressure with the support of the First Lord Weymouth. In 1715 they petitioned again and gave compelling reasons for a lighthouse. They described the race, which yet leaves room enough of smooth water in good weather between it and the island for ships to sail without danger in the daytime. None dare venture there at night. It told of the sea running so high in the race on spring tides and in stormy weather that it was very dangerous even for the largest vessels to pass it. Several ships homeward bound have been seen in the Channel, but never arrived at their ports, having been there swallowed up, not knowing how to avoid the race. Islanders have seen ships sink in storms, but never saw nor heard of such ships, goods or men, or any part of their wreck afterwards. The petition continued, a lighthouse on the south part of Portland, where it may be seen both eastward and westward, would prevent all these dangers and losses, and be of great benefit to all ships and vessels which pass the Channel, to the saving of many men's lives, and the said lighthouse would be an excellent landmark in the daytime. This finally convinced Trinity House, who signed a lease for Holman and Langrish to erect one or more convenient lighthouses on the said island, with good and visible lights to be kept continually there in the night season, so as ships might better come to their ports without peril. Construction of the twin lighthouses proceeded rapidly, and in a few months the towers of the upper light on the top of Branscombe Hill overlooking the Bill and the lower light just below it had been built. The first lights of the pair were kindled behind the glazed lanterns on the 29th of September 1716. Operation was difficult. The coal fires had to be kept going with leather bellows, and the plain glass windows tended to become blackened with soot. The new lights potentially eased navigation around Portland, but complaints were made to Trinity House that they were sometimes not lit at all, with consequent disasters, as in January 1748 when the ship Hope of Amsterdam, laden with immense treasures, was wrecked on Chesil Beach, because, according to John Hutchins, it being very dark and no light from Portland lighthouses, either by reason of the great mist or the neglect of the persons concerned there. In 1752, 2 elder brethren of Trinity House sailed to Portland to inspect the lights. On approaching by sea, they were alarmed to note that it was nigh 2 hours after sunset before any light appeared in either of the lighthouses. As a result, Trinity House terminated the lease and took over the running of the Portland lights themselves. As time went on, Trinity House realised that the Portland lights were grossly inadequate. To remedy this, in 1789, the higher light was fitted with revolutionary oil lamps developed by the Swiss-born Aimé Argand, in which the wick was enclosed in a glass tube, giving a clean, intense flame. A highly polished parabolic reflector placed behind each lamp threw the light forward with great brilliance. This was the first lighthouse in Britain to be fitted with Argand lamps, which thereafter became the standard illumination for lighthouses throughout the world. Weymouth builder William Johns was then engaged to construct a totally new lower light tower to the design of engineer Samuel Wyatt. This was built on a different site so that the pair served as better navigation marks to direct ships clear of the Race and Shambles bank. This 19-metre high tower of 1789 was a very elegant structure. The doorway and windows were in Gothic style. It may seem strange to include such classical features on a functional lighthouse on such a remote site, barely seen by anybody and accessed only along rough tracks. All becomes clear when we find that its architect, Samuel Wyatt, was, just 2 years later, to design the magnificent new headquarters for Trinity House in Tower Hill, London, constructed, of course, in Portland stone. A further link to this island is that Samuel's younger brother, the famous architect James Wyatt, was about to produce his designs for Portland's neo-Gothic Pennsylvania castle. Inside Samuel Wyatt's lower lighthouse, a stone spiral staircase with ornate iron balustrades led to the lamp room, where 6 powerful Argand lamps were installed, and where preparations were made for a world-beating innovation. Experimental 21-inch diameter plano-convex lenses were installed by inventor Thomas Rogers to magnify the light from the burners. The trial was considered a success, and Portland thereby had the first lighthouse anywhere in the world to use a true lens. For the first time, these remarkable new optics could throw a concentrated beam as far as the seaward horizon on a clear night. This commemorative marble plaque was affixed above the door and is now displayed in the current lighthouse. The Portland lighthouses were in fine order when King George III came to see them in September 1791. 10 years later, the great lighthouse engineer Robert Stevenson reported the lighthouses to be in most excellent condition. The keepers kept meticulous records, as in this account from 1810, detailing the weather, oil consumed, hours of illumination, and the number of ships passing, which on August the 10th included a fleet of 52 ships. In November 1824, the higher light was converted to a revolving one with 3 faces, giving a flash every 2 minutes. But 12 years later this reverted to a stationary fixed one when it was upgraded with a new optical apparatus made by Chance Brothers of Birmingham. The Portland lights of 1836 were now among the most powerful on the English coast. However, France was now far ahead of Britain in lighthouse technology, partly due to the stubbornness of Trinity House to adopt new developments, their elder brethren being mostly retired seamen with no engineers or scientists on their board. Things changed when Trinity House eventually decided to adopt the remarkable lens system and oil lamps invented by Frenchman Augustin Fresnel, on which Britain's enterprising Chance Brothers were becoming world leaders. Trinity House then commissioned Chance & Co. to install the Fresnel system at Portland in 1856, for which the upper tower was raised in height. By this time, Chance Brothers had become the leading supplier of lighthouse lenses around the world. 5 years earlier, they had supplied all the 300,000 panes of glass for the fabulous Crystal Palace of the Great Exhibition in London. The number of naval and mercantile ships passing Portland Bill was increasing rapidly, so to increase range and visibility, in 1866, Trinity House's engineer-in-chief, James Douglas, designed 2 completely new towers for Portland. His new higher lighthouse was a 2-storey circular building, and its 11-metre high tower being built on a Portland stone plinth. From the 1820s, British lights had been technologically inferior to the latest French ones, but by now the scientific and mathematical genius of the Chance family and other specialists was shining through, and their firm became world leaders in their field. This company manufactured the helical lanterns for both lighthouses as designed by James Douglas. They were first ordered dioptric lenses, fronting 5-wick oil lamps. When first officially lit in October 1867, the light's range was up to 18 miles. The new lower light was 25 metres high in 5 stories and had generous quarters attached for the 3 keepers and their families. Inevitably, there were accidents. In June 1866, a carpenter, by the name of Carpenter, working on the building, had his leg crushed when a crane fell on him. 10 years after completing his 2 Portland lights, James Douglas accomplished the incredible feat of building the famous 4th Eddystone lighthouse, a supreme achievement for which he was knighted. The structures of both the higher and lower lighthouses of 1867 have survived into the 21st century. But by the late 1800s, their technology had become dated, and they could not be adapted to house the latest apparatus. Trinity House decided to erect a new single tower close to Bill Point, near a stone marker obelisk which they had erected in 1844. Thomas Matthews, who from 1892 was Trinity House's engineer-in-chief, was the designer of this new lighthouse, and no expense was to be spared in fitting it with the state-of-the-art technology. This site was common land, so the agreement of Portland's Court Leet had to be obtained. Messrs. Wakeham Brothers of Plymouth was awarded the contract, and they started work in 1903. For the foundations they excavated down 2 metres into the bedrock, and stone for the tower walls was quarried from the nearby cliffs. Access to the remote tip of Portland Bill was a challenge, as there was only a rough track from Southwell. The rubble stone wall of the tower was then cement rendered to a very accurate and uniform taper, as the wooden scaffolding was taken down. The 115 feet, that's 35 metre high building was completed by late 1905 when specialists, Chance Brothers, brought the great lantern in wooden crates from their West Midlands glassworks to be hoisted to the top, where it was assembled. And the tower was painted in bright red and white livery, creating a striking feature in the landscape, which has been the tourist symbol of Portland ever since. The new lighthouse had cost £13,000, some £1.8 million at today's prices. Keepers Taylor and Cumben moved house from the old Lower Light. The Cumben family have been associated with the Portland lighthouses continually since 1721. Assistant keeper Robert Cumben was issued with this certificate in 1806 to exempt him from the notorious naval press gang service. The new lamp was lit for the first time on the 11th of January 1906, and flags were flown to mark this historic occasion. The interior of the tower is divided into 5 levels, accessed by spiral staircases of stone, except for the very steep flight to the lantern room, which is steel. On the ground floor were the oil tanks and a workshop. From there, paraffin was pumped under pressure to smaller tanks in the service room. A further pump pressurized the oil, which was then fed to the lamps in the lantern room at the top. In the centre of the service room is a hollow steel stanchion leading up to the optical apparatus, being the shaft for the descending drive weight of the clockwork mechanism. Inside, the lantern is what is called a first-order Fresnel catadioptric lens, designed and made to the highest precision in flawless quality glass. Catadioptric optics comprise reflecting prisms accurately ground to variable angles, fixed above and below the main bullseye lens to project all the light forward in a parallel beam. The entire optical assembly, including the rotating drive mechanism, was supplied and installed by Chance Brothers. It was and is a work of incredible precision, which could hardly be bettered today. Ventilators were built into the walls of the iron pedestal base to ensure a constant flow of air to prevent condensation in the lantern. The framing is of gunmetal, and the lantern room was topped with a domed steel roof. To create the flashing effect from the single constant lamp, the lenses and entire optical assembly was rotated by clockwork, driven by a heavy weight descending inside the hollow steel tube. The rate of descent was governed by a small gearbox. A vital job of the lighthouse keepers was to crank the weight back up to the top, which had to be repeated without fail several times a night. To achieve an almost frictionless motion, the 3.5 tons lantern floated on a trough of mercury. The light through the complex rotating lens had a character of 20 seconds, comprising 4 grouped flashes, followed by an interval of 15 seconds. The vaporized oil burner lamp sent its 500,000 candle power beam 18 nautical miles on a clear night. The overall design and construction of the tower and the optics was so advanced that remarkably few alterations had to be made in its first 100 years. It stands as a permanent tribute to Sir Thomas Matthews, who was knighted for his designs for this and at least 14 other lighthouses, to the builder Wakeham Brothers, and to the skills of Chance Brothers. After Maine's electricity belatedly arrived at the Bill, in 1941 Bennett and Escott of Weymouth replaced the old oil-burning lamp with an electrical assembly with a powerful 3 kilowatt bulb. This was superseded by smaller but more intensive 1 kilowatt bulbs in 1996. A little room 23 metres below the main lantern houses a ruby sector light, which shines a steady red beam to warn vessels of the shallow Shambles shoal, a hidden hazard below the surface southeast of the Bill. In 2013, its arc was widened to 21 degrees. For centuries, mariners have been wary of the Shambles, the submerged navigational hazard just a few metres below the surface. It lies southeast of the Bill, unseen from the surface. It rises up to 22 metres above the surrounding seabed with steep sides. The shoal is some 5 kilometres long and 2 kilometres wide, and comprises huge sand waves, some being 7 metres high, overlying a gravelly, shelly ground. All vessels navigating the English Channel strive to avoid it. Before accurate sea charts, ships often grounded on the Shambles. In 1762, the man-of-war HMS Ripon struck fast and could only be freed after most of her 60 guns were thrown overboard. Earlier, one of Ripon's guns had exploded during a fight with a French privateer on this coast, killing 8 men. In the winter of 1805, an incompetent pilot caused one of the greatest catastrophes in the English Channel, when the East Indiaman, the Earl of Abergavenny, with 402 people aboard, struck the Shambles bank. Captain John Wordsworth, brother of poet William Wordsworth, managed to get her off, but the ship sank when trying to beach in Weymouth Bay, with the loss of 263 lives, and the captain went down with her. Appreciating the hazards, Trinity House, the Maritime Safety Authority, carried out accurate soundings of the Shambles, and in 1824 announced that 2 buoys had been placed to mark the shoal, a red buoy at the eastern end and a black one to the west. These buoys would have been hard to see in a swell or murky light. In 1828, the black one had to be replaced, having been driven some miles away in a storm. With the rapid increase in shipping in the Channel, Trinity House announced in early 1859 that they were to station a lightship on the Shambles to replace the buoys, despite some mariners doubting that a vessel could be secured there in gales. This unpowered wooden-hulled vessel was painted red with the word Shambles in large letters on its sides. Its single mast carried a fixed white lamp. These were still dangerous waters, and in March 1883 a steamer managed to collide with the lightship, causing severe damage to both vessels. The lightship, of course, had no power of her own, and 4 months later she was towed away and scrapped. A replacement iron lightship was placed on station later that year. This new unpowered 180-ton vessel took its place in 1883, manned by a master and mate, 4 able seamen and 3 lamplighters to tend the 8 oil lamps. The crew spent a most boring 2 months aboard and 1 ashore. Its oil lamps produced long and short double flashes every half minute, and she had a fog signal which sounded high and low notes every 2 minutes. Through World War I, numerous German mines sank a number of ships around the Shambles, and the situation on this coast was so serious in the Second World War that the Shambles lightship was removed to harbour for the duration. A new, far more advanced lightship arrived in 1946. This had a bright revolving light with a 10-mile range and a Diaphone foghorn which could easily be heard inland. By the 1970s, crude lightships had become unsustainable, so the vessel was finally towed away in April 1976. The intention was to replace it with a huge 84-ton technically advanced automatic Landby buoy, but this proved unsuitable, so two high focal plane buoys with electric fog signals were anchored in position to mark the shoal. The latest navigational aids meant nothing when faced with human carelessness, as in 1978, when the 18,000-ton RFA tanker Ulwen managed to run aground on the Shambles, a huge embarrassment for the Navy. She was undamaged and towed off after 12 hours. Now back on dry land to the lighthouse and the coming of the foghorn. Early in the Second World War, before most ships had radar, Trinity House decided that there should be an audible warning of Portland's rocky coast when shrouded in mist. Portland's F-type fog signal was developed by the ubiquitous Chance brothers. Installed in 1940, it was an ingenious device based upon the Diaphone invented by pipe organ builder Robert Hope Jones in 1894. Compressors for the foghorn in the base of the tower delivered pressurized air to a total of 6 big cylindrical receivers. Those in turn piped air to 2 smaller receivers on the floor above. When the keepers assessed low visibility, they activated valves to release the pressurized air, which resonated the sounding ports of the Diaphone, amplified through its bell-mouth iron trumpet poking through the tower wall. The powerful, deep and melodious 3.5-second blast sounded once every 30 seconds as a unique signature, telling vessels and everyone else in the 8-mile earshot, this is Portland. Portlanders particularly loved the grunt at the end of each blast, caused by the piston decelerating as the air supply was cut. The old drop-weight clockwork mechanism for rotating the lantern was replaced by an electric motor in 1952. A fresh coat of special paint was applied in 1990, giving the sunlit lighthouse a vivid contrast to the seascape backdrop. Then in 1992 a major modernization began, culminating in full automation in 1996. Thereafter, the Portland Bill Lighthouse was controlled from Trinity House's planning centre in Harwich. The 1996 automation meant that the last keepers, Larry Walker, Ted Whaley and Peter Fitch, left their posts, and their adjoining quarters were turned over to other uses, notably a visitors' centre, which was opened in May 2015 by Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal. in her capacity as master of the Corporation of Trinity House. Meanwhile, the redundant old hire lighthouse had become a private residence and the one-time home of birth control pioneer Mary Stopes. In recent years, it has been adapted to a beautiful private dwelling with holiday accommodation, taking advantage of its spectacular setting and views. The redundant old lower lighthouse enjoyed a brief spell as a cafe and tea rooms between the wars, and in 1960 it was converted to a nationally important bird observatory opened by naturalist Sir Peter Scott. Portland Bill Lighthouse has been the focus of much publicity over the years. Here a huge banner proclaimed the impending 2012 Olympic sailing events which were held at Portland. What better place for a charity-sponsored abseiling event for the public as here in 2005. A major modernisation starting in 2019 saw the virtual gutting of the original installations. The much-loved pressurised air-powered foghorn had been decommissioned in 1996, although for nostalgia's sake it was sounded once a week until 2017. It had been superseded by a higher-pitched electronic signal with a much reduced audible range. The sound from that signal was emitted through 4 holes in a blocked-up window opening on the south side of the tower. The old deep-throated Diaphone fog signal equipment was finally removed in early 2019, leaving only the silent and emasculated horn trumpet. In the modernisation, the 1996 electronic fog signal was also removed and the window put back in its place. Affixed to the railings is the fog visibility detector, joined on the balcony by the new omnidirectional fog signal. The range of the new fog signal of 2019 is even shorter than the earlier units. Its sound will reach only about 1 nautical mile. The historic and much-loved lamp behind the revolving optic was extinguished for the very last time at 7:17 on the morning of the 5th of October 2019. Its final moment, switching off after 113 years, was beautifully captured here by Kevin Burden. This is Trinity House's time-lapse showing the dismantling of the entire optical assembly, with its magnificent first-order lens which had been in place since 1905. was all removed from the lantern room in 2019, leaving just its iron pedestal and the trough from which the hazardous flotation mercury had been drained. The segments of prismatic lenses were carefully placed around the balcony and eventually lowered to the ground by a pulley system. The historic optic is now reassembled for all to admire on the ground floor visitors area, in the space vacated by the removal of the big fog signal air tanks and compressors. Pending the installation of the new permanent lamp, a temporary light was affixed to the very top of the dome, a job requiring a good head for heights. In the lantern room is now a powerful fixed LED lamp with a standby, which flashes in a similar character sequence as the old light. This very advanced programmable lamp comprises a single row of 64 small LEDs in a highly polished acrylic lens. These produce a very intense narrow beam of only 1.6 degrees vertically. Although its theoretical range is less than the old one at 18 nautical miles, in good atmospheric conditions on a clear night it is likely to be seen well beyond 20 nautical miles. This is because whereas the previous moving beams were seen as ever briefer flashes the further out to sea you were, by contrast the 4 flashes of the new lamp will be seen by ships as constant and even 1.5 seconds pulses at any distance. Trinity House says that this makes it a much better light to navigate from. The flashes are followed by a 9.5 second eclipse in a period of 20 seconds. Although the lamp itself shines at 360 degrees, the existing blanking in the lantern room prevents the light from being seen from inland. With GPS, radio and radar, shore lighthouses are not as vital as they used to be, but Portland's is still important. Our lighthouse has always had a special aesthetic beauty. Gone is the awe-inspiring foghorn. The soporific moving beams of light no longer sweep across the sea, leaving the exquisitely proportioned, red-banded gleaming white tower with its steady new light, standing sentinel over the cliffs and waves of this lively coast. Let's take a final look at the silently revolving lenses, projecting the beams far out to sea. The rotation is genteel, but at the extreme distance the looms sweep the horizon at breakneck speed.